Welcome everybody, you're watching Mr. Fugu Data Science. Today's an extension of what we did for the previous video. It's going to be pretty short, probably a little boring. Feel free to hit me up, my socials right here. Let's get started. Kernel extensions versus system extensions. We're talking about Mac OS. If you don't use Mac or don't care, this isn't the video for you. As of Catalina, there was a transition to try to change this due to firmware issues, potential security threats. Kernel extension is a piece of code designed to go or be loaded directly into the kernel. This is dealing with your low-level tasks. Think of interactions such as memory, hardware, and disk management. The kernel extension, abbreviated 𝐾𝐥𝐤𝐞, should have two files that are sent with it. One of them is an exec file with some binary code, and the other would be something like an info.plist. You could consider this as something similar to a requirements text that you would have if you were using like a virtual machine. It's giving you a layout of what dependencies you may be using. You may also have other folders which may contain information such as your device firmware or even plugins and information about other kernel extensions that may be provided as well. So the way the developers were utilizing this, they were having full access to run and build applications within the Mac ecosystem at its core. This gave rise to full functionality and a native environment while accessing the lowest depths of the system. With this usage, there came some risks, and that was one of the downfalls. For instance, what if you got a bug, a piece of malicious code, and then ended up with a kernel panic and your machine crashes, or somebody injects something and security protocol weren't there to catch it? Later on, as of Catalina or right after Catalina, this was implemented to try to catch it with some security protocol before they transitioned to these system extensions, which were a little bit different. You always had to worry about when you used a kernel extension, what if someone tried to crash your machine or potentially try to exploit it. So as of Mac OS 11, I don't know if that was Big Sur, but kernel extensions were deprecated. And then as of Mac 11, they just weren't even supported at all. So over time, basically Apple was trying to evolve and restrict access to these kernel extensions. And in order to provide an environment which was safe for the users, this became really evident. You had these security certificates that were used by developers using these kernel extensions. And this would give a security check where each time it was installed, one of these kernel extensions, system would have to check for malware. The system extension is a little bit different because it's working in what's called a user space. That user space is actually separating you from the direct kernel. We'll look at an example of this shortly with one of these links to see the linking of what's really going on. What happened was you have a driver kit and your system extension firmware. Let's look at the examples real quick to see what's going on, because when you had the kernel extensions, you could just build as many kernel extensions as you needed to help with whatever drivers or any kind of implementation of something you needed, like dealing with a trackpad or dealing with some kind of functionality or dealing with X, Y, and Z. And instead, now you're kind of narrowing it down to fewer and fewer options for you. So let's look at the first one, the system extension firmware. And this is directly from Apple. So let's scroll in a little bit so it'll be easier for those to see. The system driver extension, which we're looking at now here, is dealing with drivers, system extensions, kernel extensions for low-level tasks, blah, blah, blah. Why is this important? The system extension here is dealing with the user space. This user space is outside of the kernel, which you are directly trying to get access to when you are using these kernel extensions. So it's giving you an outer layer, basically, to try to insulate you from having someone potentially implement something directly. You're kind of insulated from it, from the environment, which is a good thing. They say like running the user space is actually making it easier to develop, debug, and install your code. The next thing, we'll look at the drivers. The driver kit is basically taking care of your USB serial stuff and then other device related stuff. Here's something that's interesting with this. So you're dealing with stuff that's written in C++. It's dealing with driver basic structure, handling events, and allocating memory. memory. So the takeaway here for this framework is this. Let's highlight it if you want to pause the video. And then next we'll have the network extension, which is dealing with your content filters and your DNS stuff, or VPNs for security. So you're dealing with your Wi-Fi configuration, hotspot stuff, your VPN. So here it is right here if you want to pause the video. And then the last thing we'll talk about is this endpoint security. This, on the other hand, is working in C, not C++, and it's potentially looking for malicious activity. So that's a takeaway from this one. And from what I was reading from one of these articles, I noticed that it said it's more difficult to find malware because you can't exactly access the kernel anymore. And I'm really interested if that's still an issue, or if maybe people are going about this in a different way since they're accessing things without using the kernel. I don't really know, because now when you're using, I think, system extensions, you may need permission every time. I'm not really sure. This isn't really my thing. I've just been reading since I've been looking into updating and dealing with unsupported and older Macs lately. That's the gist of that. But that's the end of this video. I told you it was short, maybe a little boring, but please like, share, and subscribe. And if you subscribe, turn on that notification bell. Feel free to leave a comment for any suggestions for future videos. It'd be great if you could help support the channel with super thanks, memberships, or buy me a coffee. Thanks a lot. See you in the next one. Bye.
Hey kid, don't ever let them get inside your head.